When I was a freshman in college, I took a summer off to work and make some extra money to support my family. There wasn't much in the way of decent jobs where I lived, as the local economy, it sucked, but I managed to score a pretty sweet deal. I'm Native American, and the local tribe, they sponsor a program where people under the age of 25 can choose a local job and work in exchange for the tribe paying them instead of the business. I had a few prospects, but I settled on a custodial job at a local church. I thought it would be nice to lend a hand to them anyways, as their aging custodian, he didn't always have the time to get to everything between his other jobs. The job was easy, and the pay, it was pretty nice for what it was. The local tribe, they would pay well over the minimal wage, especially to college students. The custodian gave me a rundown of what I was supposed to take care of between services, but after that, I was on my own for the remainder of my time working there. Like I said, the job was easy enough. I'd arrive at about 7 AM in the morning, and I'd pick up what little trash may have accumulated on the lawn. Then, I'd move inside and vacuum where necessary, and I'd maintain the bathrooms. Every few days, I dusted or did the lawn work, but the majority of my work, it was inside the church. The other custodian, he did the mowing and lawn work in the evenings after I'd left. The only problem I had with it was that the church, it didn't have the money to run the AC during the week when no one was there. So the church, it was extremely hot inside. I really enjoyed being able to work on my own, and the peace and quiet was much appreciated. I was supposed to work 8 hours a day, but my work rarely took more than 5 or 6. I tended to work pretty slow, so I would still have something to do throughout the week. At one point, the manager of the program, he told me that if I finished work early, I could take a paid siesta on a comfortable couch at the church. A job that pays you to take a nap? Sounds like a win-win, right? Let me tell you a little bit about the church. It was the second largest in the town I lived in, but it wasn't too terribly massive. There were about 50 or so rooms, with about 2 or 3 sub-rooms within those rooms. Most of them were rarely used though, so I didn't have to bother too much with cleaning them. The church was split into 2 buildings. The main building, which was where the services and most of my work took place, and a fellowship building that was located down a short walkway from the main building. The main sanctuary, where the services took place, was in the center of the building with large double doors out front, and the rest of the church, it was built around it. I think the sanctuary was the original church, but as the church grew, they built around it. The outer portion of the church was sectioned into 3 long hallways, with classrooms littering the halls. The hallways formed a very angular, upside-down U-shape around and behind the sanctuary. There were a few other things that made the job interesting. The church had a problem with vandals breaking in from time to time, so when I got there in the morning, I always locked the doors behind me as I moved through the building. I always double-checked the entry-exit doors once I arrived to make sure that they were locked and secure. I was there by myself, but I figured my car parked in front would dissuade anyone from wanting to break in. Another quirk was that the building had been built with an absence of windows. The main sanctuary was the only room that had any windows, and thus was the only room that wasn't pitch black when the lights were off. The last quirk I remember was that the wiring in the building, it was pretty bad. It wasn't a shock hazard or fire hazard, but it wasn't designed very well. Some of the light switches or breakers didn't control the lights or power for any rooms nearby. One in the hall, for example, controlled the lights and power for a small room on the other side of the building. Still though, the job was a pretty sweet deal for what it was. The first month of work was pretty uneventful. I generally showed up at 7 AM, did my thing and left by 4 PM. I can't really remember anything exceptionally creepy leading up to when things got started. But then again, if anything had been going on, I probably dismissed it as the building shifting or something. The first truly odd thing that happened seemed to come out of nowhere. It was the middle of the day and I had been vacuuming and checking classrooms when, all of a sudden, I started to feel really ill. It was hot in there, so I thought to make sure I wasn't dehydrated. I went to the back center hall of the U where the water fountain was, and I made sure to drink plenty of water. I sat on the bench in the hallway. The center hall was the only area that had the lights off, as I had turned the breakers off in the rest of the building to save the church money on utilities. As I sat on the bench, I started to feel ill again, only it felt different this time. I got this odd feeling in front of my head. It's hard to describe, but it felt like someone had their hand in my brain and was groping around. The next thing I knew, I fell over on the bench and I passed out. I was only out for half an hour or so, but while I was out, I remember having a vivid nightmare. In my nightmare, I was alone in a poorly lit dining hall. A great table was in the center and luxury chairs surrounding it. A feast had been set at the table, but there was no one sitting at the table. The only light in the room was from the candles on the table. I started to sit down at the table to figure out what was going on, but before I could, I noticed something odd about the shadows cast by the candlelight. The lights were casting a lone shadow at the far end of the table. The shadows cast the silhouette of a large figure sitting at the end of the table in the head chair. The silhouette was massive and looked like it belonged to an 8-foot tall man. I didn't know how much, but I knew to fear whatever was making that shadow. I got up from the table to run away, but there was no door to exit through. The last part of the dream I remembered was me cowering on the floor while the silhouette loomed over me like a cat over a doomed mouse. I woke up at that point, but when I opened my eyes, I couldn't move the rest of my body. I stared forward, and for a brief second, I could have sworn that the figure, it was standing over me. I fought with all of my might to move any part of my body, but to no avail. I passed out again. I woke up shortly thereafter, frightened and sore all over. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, but I dismissed it as a bad heat-induced dream. I didn't let it get to me too much, and I finished my day. The next day, when I moved in the church, something seemed off. I still can't put my finger on it, but the lights seemed to have a strange glow to them, and the hallways, they didn't feel so empty. I tried to ignore it and get my job done quickly so I could leave the main building. Over the next few days, I suffered several more instances of what I now know to be sleep paralysis. I would sit down for a break, get that strange feeling in my head, and then pass out. Each time I had that dream, with only slight variations. The only thing that ever happened differently was that I'd run to a different corner of the room to get away, but to no avail. I started dreading to go to work, but I really needed the money. A few weeks passed and things seemed like they were starting to get back to normal. I'd stopped having the sleepy paralysis, and I thought whatever was going on was over. I was very wrong. It was nearing the end of my day. I had just finished one wing of the U, and I'd moved to the center hall where the water fountains were. I turned the lights off in the hallway I'd just been working through, and turned the lights on in the hallway I was now working in. In the middle of my work, I had to go to the restroom, which happened to also be in the center hall next to the water fountains. I did my business and I went out into the hall again. I had started vacuuming when I noticed something odd. The lights in the hall I had previously turned off, they were on again. I initially dismissed it as me forgetting or misremembering, and I tried to work, but I kept getting this awful feeling. When I got to the far end of the center hall, I heard a large crash. I immediately rushed back to the hall, thinking that the ceiling must have collapsed or something, only to find that nothing seemed to have been disturbed. Now totally bewildered, I decided that it would be best to forget the whole thing and get back to work. I was at the point in the hall where I had heard the first loud crash when I heard another sound. It was a door hinge creaking. I turned quickly to see one of the Sunday school classroom doors swinging slowly back and forth, like it had just been opened. That door had a faulty doorknob, so it would never close if you just let it fall shut. The light in the classroom, it was on, but as I stared, the light, it turned off. At that point, all I could think was, someone must have broken in. I was scared, but also angry, as I knew the sub-room from that room was where the children's fundraising money was kept in a lockbox. And I wasn't about to let someone steal from the church. I then said, in the most authoritative voice I could muster, "I know you're in there. Come out now, and we can forget this thing ever happened. I'll let you walk away, and if you do what I say, I won't even call the cops." That last part, it was a lie. I had every intention of calling the police, but for now, I was locked inside with an intruder. Slowly approaching the classroom, I pulled out my utility knife. When I got to the door, I pushed it forward, and I entered the room quickly, knife in one hand and a flashlight in the other, looking in both directions. When I saw no one, I quickly moved to the sub-room and I checked it out. Again, I saw no one. I went back to the light switch and I flipped it on. I swear I checked every square inch of that room. No one was there. At this point, I was very unsettled. It was about 3:45, so I decided that I'd finish the rest of the cleaning later. I turned the lights off again, this time feeling dread with every switch I flipped off. As I was at the end of the center hall, again, almost where I'd been standing when I heard the other noises, I heard the door creak again. I turned quickly, shining my light down the hall to see the door moving back and forth again. The light flickered on again, only this time it was different. The light was on, but there was a darkness in the room so black that it seemed to be eating the light surrounding it. I didn't care anymore. I turned to run out of there as fast as I could. I heard the door behind me slam open, followed by the sound of large, lumbering steps following me down the hall. I ran to an exit door at the other far end of the U, quickly unlocking the door and tumbling out, falling to the ground. I got back up and pushed the door closed, reaching for my keys to lock it. I held the door closed, but could feel someone on the other side pressing against them with a tremendous amount of force. I looked through the glass section on the door, but I couldn't see anyone on the other side. Eventually, after struggling against whatever was on the other side of that door for what seemed like forever, the pressure, it stopped, and I was able to shut the door all the way, reach for my key, and lock it. I called in sick the next day, which was luckily a Friday. You couldn't imagine how relieved I was that the next week was the end of my regular duties, and the church put me to work volunteering at their youth event out of town. I never told anyone about what happened. A few months afterwards, I found out that the pastor of the church had started an affair with a woman he met online. He had started the affair online at about the time that I had the first instances of sleep paralysis. Worse yet, he had left one Thursday to finally go to meet her in person. And you guessed it, it was the Thursday when stuff seriously went down for me. I had actually seen him grabbing some stuff from his office across the street from the church that morning. He told me that he was leaving for a convention, but he was actually leaving to meet the woman he'd met. Before all of this came to light, near when this happened to me, he told the church that he was stepping down to take care of his terminally ill wife. That was a lie. He shortly after left his wife and their children and cleaned out their bank account and left his family without a penny. I can't help but feel like his actions are what caused, well, whatever the hell was in that church to happen. That wasn't the last I ever saw of whatever that thing was, but that's another story entirely. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys. And you know, I once knew this guy who attended my local church, and he would always ask me whether or not he should sing in church. And after some time of him asking me again and again, I just told him that maybe he should inquire. Get it? Inquire? Oh, I can just feel the face palms now, guys. Thanks again to the Hive member that bravely shared their story for us all here, and I hope you're doing well, mate. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always guys, keep them coming as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also, please do me a favor and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent just so that I can be above board with everything. And also remember to tell me in the email if you would like to remain anonymous, and please change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. As always guys, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for updates throughout the week. You can also catch me on my second channel, all of which have links in the description below. Thanks again for always tuning in guys, for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.